Bakakalikakari! Hurai! Jahaish!
I must admit, when I was filming Timothy's performance, I was like, this is what it's all about. This scene is what this entire film is all about.
Hi, I'm Tanya Lapointe, producer on Dune Part 2.
I'm Jacqueline West, the costume designer.
And I'm Greig Fraser, the cinematographer.
And this is how we did it.
Do you think you could have a chance?
The scene of the assembly chamber where Paul Atreides declares himself the Lisan al-Gaib is probably one of my favorites.
Paul goes into the south to rally his supporters.
There were thousands of Fremen in this cave praying.
You know, in Arrakis, you don't meet above ground because it's way too harsh.
Everything about the way that they live is based on survival and on strength and loyalty and the collective effort of living together in very difficult conditions.
So the lighting was an interesting challenge.
Patrice Vermette did a concept art with these shafts of light. There had to be this sacredness to the space, and that's what the light was creating. That's what the darkness was also creating, the contrast of the two.
And in trying to fulfill Patrice's vision of the concept art that he'd shown us. Unfortunately, I didn't think there was film lights really would do it service. The ideal scenario would be shoot with real daylight, but that wasn't possible. So we used 20K mole beams, angled in a very precise direction to make sure that every beam of light was the same.
The scene was shot in English, but it was also filmed in Chicopsa. We had linguist David J. Peterson, and he went back to the original book from 1965 and took the elements that were hints as to what this language would be. And from those building blocks, he fleshed out an entire language. And therefore, when Timothy is on screen and speaking Chicopsa, he knows the words that he's speaking. It's not gibberish. But having him speak the language of the people make it that much more convincing. Because he's not talking to audience members, he's talking to the Fremen.
How many extras do you think there were that day?
There was hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yep,
It
multiple
was-
hundreds.
300 people you have to put in costumes.
My team worked for weeks on fitting people. It was just a stream every day of people coming in to be fitted in these clothes.
Denis was very specific on every aspect of their culture, how they lived, how they ate, how they slept, how they dressed. In the north, the Bene Gesserit are dressed very simply, whereas when we are in the assembly chamber, the Bene Gesserit enter and they're wearing these ornate headdresses. And Jacqueline West designed them in such a, they're almost royal. And you understand that religion in the South is that much more revered.
The protection from the elements and from the sand and the wind in the desert, most of it is with cloth. I had a friend hand weaving a lot of the fabric of the people very close to the camera, the people closest to Paul. Then I had this magnificent textile person, Matt Reitzma, and he had a whole team of people dyeing the fabrics into all the different colors of the sand. At one point at the studio in Budapest, there was an acre of racks just with fabric stretched on them to dress all those people. Then all that fabric, one by one, each piece was brought into the workroom and all printed. So each person would be unique. It was a massive undertaking.
We had a lot of angles in that scene. And the great thing about Jacqueline's work, I'll say that you don't have to add light to her costumes for them to read. Every time we moved people around to kind of cheat people to be in the foreground, all the costumes were extraordinary, and texturally they just were a joy.
Thank you, Rick. You make me look good though with that lighting.
It was also very complex because we were on a soundstage.
We never had a space that was big enough. It was actually physically impossible to find a space big enough to shoot sort of the dreams of what we wanted.
We had 300 people who came over 4 days.
We shot pretty much in a very similar direction, but we turned people around. We moved their angles, we sort of shot over people and through people to give the audience the idea that he's literally just surrounded by this mob.
Thousands of Fremen who either believe in the prophecy that he is the chosen one, or on the opposite, who are against him taking so much power.
And I think that scene is kind of the culmination. Is Paul Atreides just another ruler instead of a savior?
So far up to that point, he'd sort of had some people believing in him, some people didn't. He didn't believe himself. But at that point, I think he started to believe himself. And I think the world around him believed it.
The Fremen people accept that he is the Lisan al-Gaib because the Bene Gesserit, for decades, generations, have been implanting a prophecy. And people have been believing this prophecy for so long. And what Paul does is that he embraces the prophecy.
There's a great part of the scene where Paul's won them over and the knives are kind of in the air, raised in the air. And we're being very particular about making sure that we could see Paul through those knives. It's quite a symbolic image of, Paul's destiny, Paul's future.
That's the pivotal moment.
This is the reason, his reason to be there.
He's the Messiah.
He's the Messiah. He's changing people's minds.
I remember the first time I saw the finished Dune Part 2, I was thrilled by that scene. I couldn't believe that we pulled it off. I mean, it was shot so beautifully and so beautifully directed, and you're just a piece of that, you're one brushstroke in the painting.